Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. This episode sees the return of one of my most popular guests to date. Kelly Paxton specialises in pink-collar crime, embezzlement-type crimes like bookkeeping fraud that have historically been perpetrated more by women than men. That, of course, isn't because men don't commit this type of crime, but rather because there are more women doing the types of role that permit it. As Kelly emphasises on the show, men are just as capable of committing pink-collar crime as women. When Kelly came onto the show last year, there's a link to that episode in the show notes, we talked about what pink-collar crime is and how it happens. On this episode, we look at how COVID has provided a host of new opportunities for pink-collar criminals. And we talk about what she's been doing during lockdown. Spoiler alert, launching a podcast and publishing a book, both of which are well worth your time. If you heard the last episode, you'll know that what Kelly has to say is always engaging, enlightening, and entertaining. And this is no exception. So please enjoy the return of Kelly Paxton to the Human Risk podcast, talking all about pink-collar crime under COVID. Kelly, welcome back to the Human Risk podcast.
I am so happy to be back because how many people do you get back?
You're not the first person to come back, but of course I say this to everybody. I'm excited. Anytime anyone wants to come back and they have some interesting stuff to say, they are more than welcome, and you are absolutely on that list. So I'm thrilled that you're here. And look, we spoke, under COVID, this could be decades ago. I think it was last year at some point. I can't remember what, maybe it was even the year before, who knows? But anyway, I thought it would be a good idea to get you back because clearly the world of pink-collar crime has been getting more profile. And I wanted to just kickstart things by talking about COVID and what that means for pink-collar crime.
So I was on a webinar with a colleague of mine, and this was like week one of COVID. And we both said fraud's going to increase. And it's been validated 3 times by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. They've done surveys. And the reason we said it was going to increase, and you know this really well with Dan Ariely, is that when you have a distance between the suspect and the victim, and they just feel like they're entitled. Like it's just easier to cheat because you're not looking at them day to day. And then so you have that, which is just the human behavior part of it. But then you have the internal controls part where businesses are scraping to get by. They don't know, they're just doing what they can to stay in business. So they'll say, hey, here's my credit card. Go buy yourself home office setup. Or we need to open a bank account. And they forget that they've opened a bank account. So we're in just this kind of duck and cover mode. And because of that, we're going to forget what we did a year down the road, and they're not going to forget it. And they're going to go, I can use this card. I can use this bank account. And the other thing is we have financial pressures like we've never had in generation. And what is the fraud triangle? Opportunity, pressure, and rationalization. I don't know if it's like this in the UK, but we've had doctors who have never had issues making money before, like an orthopedic surgeon. They make bank. Well, you know what? Elective surgeries have been shut down. So that high lifestyle, what's happened? That's pressure. And so, and this goes to hashtag honest people steal. And then the rationalization. We've seen it, and I know you follow me on Twitter, but like the COVID fraudster or PPP pandemic profiteer is that people are just seeing money and they're like, I want a piece of it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you sort of sit there and go, on the face of it, less opportunity for fraud and we've got other concerns. But as you rightly point out, there's a whole host of dynamics there that are driving this thing. And to any listener that's not following Kelly on Twitter, or even on any social media, it's well worth doing. Because you get this kind of news. It's also the news feed of the worst kinds of people that are out there. But it's fascinating stuff. I pay particular attention to some of the stories because it is, in some respects, some of the things are astonishing. The sums of money that we've seen, the sort of innovative approach to this stuff. People genuinely get quite creative around opportunities. And I found it fascinating to observe. And the more one then thinks about COVID, you're absolutely right. It's far from being an opportunity for reducing the risk and the propensity. It's actually massively increasing it. And I think, that's been very, very clear, as you say, from the stuff you've put on social media.
Well, so I do a Friday Fraudster, and actually I was just getting ready to post it today. This is a woman who worked for a real estate company for decades. She started stealing allegedly in 2014 through 2019. And when she got caught, she broke her nose. She started a fire. And then, she even had the, I'm going to say, cojones to file a workman's comp claim. But the really disappointing part of it, if you listen to what I just said, is she got caught in November of 2019. She just got charged in January of 2021. And that is really, really hard for a business owner to stomach. Is why is it taking so long? My God, she faked a attack on, in the office. She broke her nose. She lit the place on fire. And you would think that justice might go a little faster. She just was charged. So in the meantime, the business owner, and this is the one thing when I deal with business owners as victims, they will tell you at the end of it, they are so disappointed in the criminal justice system. And this isn't anything against law enforcement. It is the wheels of justice grind so slowly. And the whole entire time, the victim is like, oh my God, why is this taking so long? They just want to move forward. And unfortunately, it's not that easy.
Right. It's astonishing. As you say, it's adding insult to injury. Does that have an impact on people's propensity to report it? I mean, have we got more? Obviously, there's the criminal side of it, but the victim side of it. Is there a greater propensity to try and move on from things and forget? Are we seeing any dynamics there?
I always tell my clients, the victims, get back to work. Money is replaceable, and I tell them that the time isn't replaceable. And it's another thing is, I think we may have said this before. If you walked into your house and you found a dead body, would you touch it, Christian?
Generally not. I don't know. It's never happened to me, right? And I'm always clear that until it happens to you, you don't know. But I'll work on the basis that I wouldn't. So,
but a business owner walks in and sees an embezzlement. It's a crime scene. And a lot of them muck it up. Don't touch it. Leave it to the professionals because it is really important. You might destroy evidence. And, even though these cases are generally pretty clean, money's here, goes here, you still don't want to mess things up like that. But I was actually listening to a podcast with Tim Ferriss. I don't know if you're a Tim Ferriss fan. I kind of in and out on his stuff.
Right, similar.
Yeah. So I don't like the fact that he has all these commercials, which you don't have, which I love. But he was talking to Jim Lair, who is a world-renowned coach. And Jim Lair brought up something really interesting, which is energy. And I hadn't thought of it before because I tell business owners, get back to the business, make money because you got to hire me and I'm not free. And time is limited. But the others, when I heard about energy, that's what it just hit me. I was like, the energy that an embezzlement sucks out of a person is so difficult because, they need to go back and make money, but they also want to stay involved in it. And it's a drain. I meet people. I met this one guy 30 years before he had been ripped off. When he found out what I did, he immediately went into, I have to tell you about my story. 30 years later, it still bothers him. And that is just I joke I'm the fraud therapist, but maybe I should become a therapist because everyone wants to talk about how much it affected them personally.
Yeah, but I guess it does, particularly if it's a smaller company, right? But even in a larger company, it feels like somebody has been kind of mocking is probably the wrong word, right? But it's a personal insult. It's a personal slight.
Oh, yeah. I say it's a really, really bad divorce, and you never even got the benefits of a good marriage with it, so...
And you've been pretty busy during this past period because you've had a book out. And I wanted to explore what the genesis of that was, what's in it, what can people discover. So tell us about that.
So I've had a lot of people tell me for many years I need to write a book because when I tell people these stories, they're like, first off, they can't believe it. They're like, how could that happen? And then so I'd been working on it and off and on. And then COVID hit and I'm like, forget it. I started my podcast, Great Women in Fraud, and I finished the book. So, I mean, that's the benefit of COVID for me because I can't be out on the road doing, trainings and keynotes. So I got it done. And the book will help investigators and auditors and accountants. But really, I want the buyer of the book to be a business owner, to see how it can happen to anyone. Because I give different examples of, dental offices, of family businesses. I want them to understand how easily it can happen. And the other thing is to not feel bad about it. Because I just met a guy on Facebook. It turns out we have a lot of shared connections. And he had posted something and I was like, so me, Stalker Kelly, goes in and digs down in his Facebook profile. And I see that he's been ripped off $250,000 in the past. He made a post about it. And I had an uncle. We're not supposed to speak ill of the dead. But my uncle was an ass. I mean, I will tell you, he was an ass. And I see on this post about this guy losing $250,000 has been stolen. And my uncle, genius that he was, and he wasn't a genius, says, how could you not miss $250,000 over 3 years? That is victim shaming. And I can't tell you how many victims get shamed. And it's just stop it, people. This is it's hurtful. And $250,000, well, to my uncle, it might seem like the world because he was never successful. But to this guy, he has, a multi-million-dollar business. So $250,000 really isn't very much. So I reached out to the guy and I was like, hey, and we've connected and it's kind of a really interesting story. But the victim shaming, a lot of businesses, they're embarrassed to say it. And, this goes to a little bit of gender. And we've talked before, pink collar crime is position, not gender. So a man can be a pink collar criminal, but women are in pink collar positions. And so more women are just better at embezzlement, but they steal less. But I mean, not to be I don't know what the term I should use is, but you get, just say, a master of the universe, some uber successful guy. And he thinks he's smart, and he very well may be very, very smart. And then you get this, I'm going to say, mousy little woman who works in your accounts payable department, and she's ripped you off. What does that do to your, I'm so smart, but how did that, and I won't say what my dad would have said. So that my uncle and my dad, just misogynist, total misogynist. It takes a hit to the ego when they're like, how did she steal that from me? I'm smarter than her. I own this business. Yeah, well, you're not paying attention to the business or for whatever reason. So I want the book for owners to kind of understand it can happen to anyone and don't feel bad about it. And the other thing is they say that only 15% of embezzlement cases go to law enforcement. A big part of it is shame and humiliation.
Right. When you frame it like that, and it's interesting you were talking because I on my Twitter feed, I often put up, sort of human risk in action, and I'll pick a story. And you're right. You're absolutely right. There's a little bit of me that goes, look at this. This is, it's almost like sort of giggling slightly and pointing at them. And I actually sort of realized there's lots of, particularly actually when you start to look at these topics, there are repeats of things. So the human beings as a species, it's sort of, I might find an incident of something's happened, but there's many times something, may not be exactly the same fact pattern, but it's something in the same space. Broadly speaking, the similar error. And I think it's really interesting when you talk in these terms because I think it's kind of embarrassing. I don't want to come forward. I don't want to put myself in the spotlight with these things. It's much easier just to keep quiet. And that, of course, is a huge strategic advantage to the person committing the fraud because it's sort of, there's that whole practice of denial. So you might spot that someone's up to something, but they couldn't possibly be doing that, so I'll ignore it. And I think there's something really interesting there that we all facilitate, in many respects, crime by not talking about these things. And we should feel more comfortable doing it. And I love the fact that you're sort of going, well, I'm just going to tell some stories. But, why do we tell kids stories and why do we share stories? It's because actually it's the way we learn. And I love that idea of what you're doing. It's sort of, it's great. I mean, it's fun to read about these things happening to other people. But it's really, I think it's a really interesting gateway that says, look, this could happen to you. You are not immune from this.
Well, there's optimism bias. I'll be in a group training someone, and, I'll tell a story, and you can see the people. I mean, I see them, and they're looking like, oh, well, that guy can get ripped off because he's not as smart as me, or that woman business owner can get ripped off because she's not as smart as me. And this also goes to, if you came home and say your house was robbed, you report it and you tell your friends, yeah, I got robbed. Do your friends usually say, hey, Christian, did you leave the house unlocked? We don't say that. Even if your car is stolen, we don't really say, is this your fault? But when there's an embezzlement, I don't want to say it's schadenfreude, even though sometimes it could be schadenfreude, but it's like, how did that happen? And, this is, me, Christian, we've talked many times. I'm a little politically incorrect, but it's kind of like going back decades. Why did rape cases not get reported? Because what would happen would be, let's show the outfit of the woman who got raped. She's wearing a short skirt. That should have nothing to do. So the fact that, you didn't look at your whatever accounts payable or something like that, we don't think we don't want to blame people. But there's a part of us that is the optimism bias. It'll never happen to me because I hire good people and I pay them well. And I have this friend's husband who, when he met me, he was like, I'll never have to hire you. No one would dare steal from me, the master of the universe. And 18 months later, guess who gets the phone call? And now he's one of my biggest people that promotes me. But it's just interesting. The whole crime is, most people, it's like when your house is robbed or your car is stolen, we feel bad for people. But this guy I met on Facebook, there's victim shaming. It's like, how'd you not miss that? That's like saying, well, hey, ding dong, did you leave your keys in your car? Did you leave your window open? We don't do that.
But there's something interesting there, right? If it happens to an individual, we react differently to if it happens to a company.
Oh, yeah. And this is, I'm not a criminologist, but I love criminology. And there's some criminologists in the 50s, Sykes and Matza, who talk about neutralization techniques. And the interesting thing about the gender is women will not blame, but they'll say, I deserved it. He treated me poorly. Things like that. Where men, it's more distant. And this also goes to Ponzi schemes. So the Ponzi schemer usually doesn't have a lot of direct interaction with the victims. But the pink collar criminal is working in a business, and day in and day out, pre-COVID, was sitting there next to, the boss and just lying face to face, day in and day out. So it's more personal. And now I worked for a big company, and I will tell you that when the company would get ripped off, and it got ripped off, and there's internal controls, there's audit, there's external audit, it still happened. But a lot of times people are like, I don't want law enforcement to investigate when a Fortune 100 company gets ripped off. I want them to investigate, the gang in the neighborhood or the serial robber or something like that. It's not a good use of resources. And that's a hard one because law enforcement's resources are limited. And it's but people think it's a corporation, they can eat it. And it's it's a little deeper than that.
It's a very strange dynamic. And that's why I think shining a light on it in the way you do, I think helps us to start thinking about those terms, which is your point exactly, is I'll tell some of these stories so that I can, I guess one, to sort of normalize these things. So these are not sort of unusual exceptions. They're happening pretty frequently. And it's a risk that every company faces, and you need to be thinking about it. And so in telling those stories, you're kind of just sitting people around the proverbial campfire and going, let's just tell you, this is some warning shots from a range of different industries, range of different scenarios, range of different characters. So this isn't this is only something that'll happen in large cities, or this is only something that'll happen in certain cultures. This is a pervasive piece. And so you cover these range of scenarios in order to kind of get that message across that it's almost a human condition, right? It's a sort of natural thing that we know because human behavior is reasonably predictable, that this stuff, if the right building blocks are in place, this is going to happen. You can't immunize yourself from it.
Yeah. And that goes to, hashtag honest people steal. Is most of the people that I've dealt with as suspects, they're decent people. They made a bad decision. And like this week's Friday fraudster, she worked for this real estate company for decades, but something must have happened in her life in 2014 that caused her to cross that line. Now, what was it? I don't know, but maybe it was a personal crisis. Maybe, there was an illness in the family, a spouse left or something like that. Or, she decided she liked the casino. I don't really know, but we don't, and I've said this before, I can't get out of bed in the morning if I think everyone's out to rip us off. That would not be a good world to live in. And like Dan Ariely says, locks are for the 80% of the people, because 10% are going to get in no matter what. 10% you have, it'll stop them, but 80% just have the lock on. So, and we've talked before about this, you put a good person in a bad environment and they can go bad. So I want it to be good environments. And I have a colleague who, and I've said this story so many times because people are just like, they're like, no way. So the guy thinks he's getting ripped off. And she dumps his data and he's like, okay, this person is in charge of this. And he gets to his admin and he goes, oh, don't look at anything she touches. She's too dumb to steal from me. Guess who stole? Like that tone at the top. Like, it's a lot easier for that, she's too dumb to steal from me person to rationalize her theft when the boss treats her like just a ding dong. And I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying it's human nature.
Right. Yeah. Just to be clear, the book isn't like a guide how to do this or a sort of just here's your Bible for committing this sort of crime. But it is, I think it's fascinating when you talk in those terms. So the book really covers these stories, and then you've written it for people that are investigating this stuff, but as you say, it's also intended for a broader audience, for people to kind of get into a topic that I guess, unless you've had personal experience of it happening to you, how else are you going to find out about this stuff? Because you will read, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you read you read something in the newspaper and go, idiot, that would never happen to me. So I guess what you're basically doing is saying here, look, let's just have a little journey so you can let's lift up the veil a little bit and let you see what's underneath, see how prevalent this stuff is. Yeah.
And I have a background in law enforcement. I arrested bad guys. Like that was, the people that you would cross the street for. The people who commit pink collar crime, they look like you and me. They are regular. Like I joke, I could plant one in the audience and, they'd be the life of the party by the end of the session because they're nice, they're friendly, they're sociable. They're regular sort of people. And lately I've been giving this example, and this is like, should be an offense to men. When you have a kid and you take your child to the grocery store and you're like, now, Johnny, if you get lost, you go look for the nice lady. And if you see a bad guy coming up to you, you scream and you yell. Well, that's really not fair because not every man is bad. And you tell them to go look for the nice lady. I can show you nice ladies all day long who, will steal. And actually, I was doing my podcast last week with a woman who specializes in construction fraud. And she was telling me the story about the nicest lady who literally would bake cookies every day for the plumbing business that she was the office manager. Well, it was a plumbing business and they had kind of a 24/7 call center. So if, no one's pipe bursts at, between 8 and 5. It always bursts per hour. And she was having to take those calls. And she went to the owner of the business and she said, I'm having to take these calls. I would like to be paid for that time. And he's like, no. And she's like, but I'm taking the calls. And he's like, no. And so she even went so far as to find out what an answering service would cost him. And he says, no, it's part of your job. Do it. Well, guess what happened? She paid herself. And I think it was almost $300,000 later, and everyone said, oh my God, she baked cookies for us every day. She was so nice. And she did try to do the right thing. She went to the boss and said, I would like to be paid to be taking these phone calls in the middle of the night. And he's like, no. And that goes to rationalization. Like, did she feel bad when she gave herself an extra paycheck? No, she probably calculated out, well, I took 4 calls and each call took a half an hour. That's 2 hours. I'm going to give myself an extra $100 this week. So, I mean, when I train business owners, I'm like, don't give them a reason. Like, no reason is justified, but make it harder for them mentally to justify it. Set a good tone.
Yeah, because the biggest control here is so you can put locks on things, but as we know, people find ways around things, and I think I think that's a really good example of a justification piece, because actually many times justification is there isn't sort of any particular research or anything done. It just sort of it feels okay, but that's an interesting example where somebody's kind of gone out and almost gone through a process of let's get some evidence, and so that makes it even more justifiable, right? It's like, well, I've priced this market. I'm not ripping him off, right? Because this is market, this is the going rate for this service that I'm providing, and I think that's a fascinating example of sort of the lengths people will go to for the mental gymnastics to happen to allow them to do these things.
Well, there was another guy that I highlighted that he went to the business owner, and he's like, I'm working really hard. I would like an extra, I think it was $100 a week. And the business owner said to him, I can't afford it. But the guy knew he could. Like, he was seeing his money. And so he's just like, I just gave myself my $100 a week raise because the guy told me he couldn't afford it. When I saw the money, I knew he easily could afford it. And so he ended up getting caught, getting prosecuted. But he had asked for the raise, and he thought he deserved it. And the business owner's like, I can't afford it. Well, that wasn't true. That, again, doesn't give you the rationalization, but it makes it easier when, again, and I use this example all the time, even though we're not traveling during COVID. Hopefully no one's traveling during COVID. As you get,
if they are, check their expense claims deeply, because they probably shouldn't be, right?
Yeah, exactly. But you come back from, say a big conference, and the business owner hands the Black American Express bill to the accounts payable clerk. And they're like, so how do you want me to break it out? I know you took, the wife and kids, or your husband and kids. And the business owner's like, just pay it. It's not your business. And rationalization, they know that the business owner should not be taking that expense. And then that person down the road can't even go to the local beach. And they're like, it's $200 to get an Airbnb for 2 nights. They're not going to miss it. And if they do miss it, I can just pull the get out of jail free card and say, I'm going to turn you into the tax authorities. So if you want your business to pay that $20,000 Black American Express bill, do it legitimately. Like, we don't need to give our employees any rationalization. Think about it that way. Think of how they're going to look at it. And we've talked about this before, dentists in the States get ripped off. 3 out of 5 dentists get ripped off. And I read this one story about a hygienist that said, if I heard the dentist complain one more time about how expensive his Jaguar, his BMW, or his Tesla's cost to get fixed, I'm going to take this drill and stick it in his ear. Like, you have this employee who is a good employee, and they're sick of the business owner complaining about, their luxury cars and how much it costs to get fixed. Like, just listen to yourself once in a while.
But that's a fascinating idea, because I don't think people would, and this is the point you're making, right? People don't equate that. It's sort of, what has that got to do with their behavior? And I think that's a really fascinating insight, that sort of people take cues and things. And so And I think particularly to your point around COVID, where there are changes in business practices, and sure, there are some absolutely legitimate needs to change processes, to do things a little bit differently, to think differently about the business model. But I think what's fascinating at the moment is actually those sorts of topics that you're talking about that veer into the space of ethics, and not just what we do, but how we do it, will send all sorts of signals to employees about what the organization is about. Now, I always sort of stop and think about that in terms of, well, does that mean they will do something that can cause reputational risk and that sort of damage the company? But to your point, actually, can go even further than that, which is it can cause you real damage internally because they will take cues. An innocent conversation complaining about X or just kind of could have huge ramifications in the space you're talking about.
Well, and there's a company, not to be named, that has gone through just this week. They got rid of their CEO that I think his pay package was like $69 million. So they got a new CEO and his pay package is over $100 million. Now, this is a huge corporation and I'm sure it's incredibly stressful to run a huge corporation. But what do you think about the people that and they've had layoffs and, like any big company, they go through reorgs, and for them to see a CEO getting a pay package that guarantees over $100 million. You wonder why employees are they're not invested in it. They're never going to earn $100 million. They're maybe not even going to earn $100 or $1 million. And when you see that, it goes to the rationalization. And it's I saw that, and based on this company, I have seen 3 CEOs with huge pay packages fail miserably. And now they just keep upping the pay package. And of course their rationalization is, well, we need someone who can turn the ship around. And it's what does it take to turn the ship around? Is it money? And, there's a lot of behavioral science, behavioral economics behind that. Money is not intrinsic. It doesn't motivate us. And so I don't know. What do you think about that, Christian, when you see, because you deal more with industry at that level, when you see a CEO that is making that kind of bank?
I start from the premise of sort of going, if you logically wanted to control that, right, you'd cap it somehow. But that's good. Where do you cap it? What's the right limit? So I have a problem with the idea of we need to restrict this stuff. On the other hand, and so I guess I'm saying I don't know where the limit lies. But on the other hand, you look at some of these numbers and you go, that is insane, particularly when it's guaranteed. Right. And it's not as a result of any particular endeavor. It's kind of like it's the price you get paid for just showing up in the morning before you've even done anything. I kind of think that's difficult. And I think particularly now where we've got, people really, really struggling and having challenge, I think it becomes, you can't be deaf to these things. I think you're not reading the room. You're really not reading. And I mean the societal room as well as the kind of organizational room. And I think it is interesting. My analysis tends to stop at a sort of ethical level, where I just go, that doesn't feel right. And I actually, maybe the way you live is, I quite like the idea that you have the CEO or it may not be the CEO is the highest paid, but the highest paid person, there's a ratio there, and you can't earn more than X times the lowest paid person, right? Well, whatever that is. And I quite like those sort of ideas because that has a form of calibration. So if you want to shift the top, sure, but then you bring everybody else up as well. And there's at least some sort of we're in this together type mindset. I don't have the answers, but I recognize the time. But I agree with you. I think it's interesting. But talking to you, the signaling effect that some of these things have is, I think, way more. It's way bigger, and it leaves a much bigger trail than people might immediately think about. Because you all the things you've talked about. Well, you could sort of sitting in the C-suite, you'd be going, what's it got to do with them? None of their business, how much I'm paid or what I spend my money on. And actually you're saying, well, it's sort of human curiosity kind of means it is. And it's funny because as I think about it, there is always this thing, how much are they getting paid? There is always this curiosity about what the C-suite is earning, what the senior people are earning. And so we should think about that when we're thinking about mitigating this piece, because actually you're talking about a form of human risk that is driven very often not by logic, but by opportunism. It's just emotional, and it's sort of logic that we use to fit our behavior. And so I think there's a really interesting point there, which is we don't think about the shadows these things cast. We'll think about it from an equality and fairness perspective. We won't think about it from some of these other knock-on consequences.
Well, and I was listening to your episode with Rob Chestnut, and I'm reading this book right now, and I love that book, like the code moments and everything like that. And it's just no regular person. I don't know any, I don't know any multi-hundred millionaire, like personally, that I deal with day to day. And like, how do they justify that number? And then you get some administrative assistant who, sees that someone they cover for, and they file their expense reports. And I had a case where a guy took himself and 3 other people out to dinner, a $10,000 dinner at Nobu. And what does that administrative assistant say in her head when she's filling out their expense report, because they're so busy running to the, private airport to fly private, and she's having a hard time because, her kid wants to play classic soccer and it's $1,200 a year. And the person who does travel in those circles, they're really removed from it, and they've worked hard. Most of them have worked really, really hard, and maybe they've made huge sacrifices. And I'm not there. There was a thing on Twitter the other day. It's a woman who does human or HR sort of stuff. And some employee wrote in and said, "Hey, my boss usually gives me $2,000 a year bonus. And this year he only gave me $1,000. And I know he got a raise. What do I do? And where do I go?" Is she's just going to start padding stuff. He was really upset because he had gotten a promotion, and then he gave her an early bonus. But when Christmas came, there was no bonus. So she was really down 50%.
Right.
And yeah, it never justifies it. I will tell people all day long, it never justifies it, but sometimes it opens the door mentally for it to happen.
And I think that reminds me of something, actually. So one of the things I say to clients around, if you want to have a look at where there are weaknesses in your control framework, one of the things to look at is look at which policies people are reading and asking questions about. Because there's one of 2 reasons they're doing that. Right. Reason number 1 is they don't understand it and they want to know. Right. So legitimate inquiry. Then I go, well, if you're getting loads of questions around one policy and it's because people don't understand it, there's a problem with you need to rewrite that. Right. That's useful feedback to you. The other reason they might be reading it and asking lots of questions about it is they are looking to test the defenses. Right. They're trying to work out where the weak points of the thing are. And so both, and I almost go, you don't need to differentiate between the 2. Lots of questions equals people are up to something, and it might be just they're going to screw something up because you've made it really difficult for them, or it's not clear or unhelpful, or because they're in that space. And I think that point you're making is really interesting, which is sort of there is this kind of behavioral cues that we get that human beings very rarely immediately suddenly start doing something that's really bad, right? There's these little, it's my favorite movie scene. I'm sure I've done this on the podcast somewhere before, right? Which is the first Jurassic Park, where they arrive in the park and the whole thing's been set up where the logo of the park is the T-Rex. So you think the Tyrannosaurus Rex is going to be, and what they need to do is dramatically set up this, the velociraptors, right? They're actually the real criminals here with the brains. And so they set this thing up. But how do they do that? Well, they explain they have this park warden arrives, and he talks about the velociraptors. And so that we know they're smart animals, he talks about them testing the fences. And so they're really smart. They never test the same bit of the fence twice, right? So they've set up and I love that as an analogy for what people do. And I think one of the cues that we often miss, to your point, is that people talking about things and asking questions and making comments, which are perfectly innocuous in of themselves. And they may not even realize they're doing it, but there is something in their heads that finds that topic interesting. And if you find that topic interesting, you are on the way to a journey of discovery in that space that might lead you to just going, I want a bit of gossip to tell people when we go for a drink together. Or it might be, or it could be both, right? Or it might be, this is information that I am processing that could become relevant to me at some point. It's a data point that's useful. Now, that is not to say that you intercept every single conversation in the organization and go, you're up to no good. But it is interesting. If you're getting a lot of feedback in a particular direction, questions about something, comments about something, thoughts about something, then that is potentially an early warning indicator as to where people's minds are at.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Joe Wells, who's the ACFE, one of the founders, is like, fraud is not an accounting problem. It is a human problem. I mean, humans are at fraud. It's just, and even if there's so much talk about artificial intelligence, and I get this question a lot, like, how can artificial intelligence stop fraud? And I deal in my practice now at a much lower level. If a business owner can't even open their checkbook or their bank statements, all the AI in the world is not going to help you. And I also say that, it's not rocket science. Again, in my practice, it's garden variety embezzlement where the money is in the business and it goes to the suspect. It doesn't end up in cryptocurrency, and the harder cases are the cash cases because you're kind of proving an unknown. A business goes to law enforcement and they're like, well, he or she stole $100,000 in cash. And they're like, cash? Like, we have to prove it to the penny. And cash skimming is a really hard one to prove to the penny. So, yeah, if you have humans, you have fraud, and all the AI in the world, yeah, it's going to help on some level, but at the end of the day, you have to trust your employees. But, I've got my trust but verify. And one of the things, they always say in retail especially, or in the service industry, delight, surprise and delight, your customer. I say surprise and delight your employee. So if your employee thinks you only look at checks over $5,000, all of a sudden ask to look at a couple that are under $1,000. So you have this, they think that maybe you're checking more than you actually are. If you only have auditors that come in the month of, May, have them come in December. So that's kind of the surprise and delight. And, I'm a little being facetious there about surprise and delight, but keep them on their toes.
Right, because I think that's an interesting thing, isn't it, around patterns and rituals and processes, and sort of, and we see that when people do things that they shouldn't be doing. It's kind of like baby steps, and then we'll get a bit further. So it's kind of breaking that pattern of normality, and then we create a new pattern. And I think this idea of habits and rituals that we then work around and we navigate around, that's one of the things that makes it easy for people to do these things. And therefore, if you mix that up a bit, that potentially has a mitigating factor.
Well, this was like over 10 years ago. I was really into geographic profiling for, crime, just all types of crime. And so you get a serial, rapist, say, and they think they're going outside of their pattern. Like, I'm going to go do it on the east side of town, or I'm going to go do it on the west side of town. But I believe he's in Canada, a famous criminologist. And it's like, there is a pattern. And I've seen the pattern when I'm doing spreadsheets for embezzlement. So, there's Benford's law where, there's a normal distribution of numbers and things like that. People think that they're being, all smart and tricky, but there is a pattern. So that serial rapist or serial killer, when they start plotting it on the map, there is really a pattern. And we are sort of, human creatures of patterns and things like that. And I've seen it where a suspect will kind of test it. Rita Crundwell, who's, the United States is, I call her the queen of pink collar crime. The first year she stole, which, long time ago, she kind of tested it. Like, she opened the bank account, the secret bank account in December. She didn't put a check through until later January. The first year, she only stole $189,000. And it wasn't in one check. It was, smaller checks. Well, the last year she stole, it was over $5 million. So people will test it. It's like, oh, they didn't notice that I, increased my expense report by X. I mean, I had a guy when I worked at this, Fortune 100 company, there was a policy, and this goes to compliance, that you could have a certain amount of food taken out of the mini bar every day. And oh my God, this guy, he was making bank. every time he went on a trip, 2 boxes of Pringles, 2 boxes of M&Ms, every single time. I was just like, okay, here he's going on another trip. Let's look at the minibar charges. He went up to the line every single time. Did he ever eat? No, he brought him home to his family. It's just like every single time he traveled, he did that. And it was just, we are creatures of patterns. And yeah. So whenever I see Pringles, I think of this guy. I just literally, whenever I see Pringles, I think of him going into the minibar going, I'm getting my Pringles that they owe me because I'm away from my family. And it's just like, oh my God, like, yeah.
But he probably doesn't even like Pringles, and nor do they, right? But it's like...
This is a guy who is like fit as can be. And yeah, a Pringle has never, he probably wanted kale chips. Maybe he was mad that they had delineated Pringles and there wasn't any kale chips.
But there's an interesting point there that sort of riffing off that piece around the rules that we set people. And I'm always sort of fascinated about how we think about things, because limits would be a good example, where it's a sort of crude approximation of an underlying risk. So if it's gifts and entertainment, it'll be sort of, at what point does something feel like a bribe? And we'll come up with a limit where nobody would be bought for, I don't know, let's just say the limit's $50 or $70 or something. You would go, nobody would be bought, as if to go, if it's a gift for $50, it's okay. If it's 50.01, right, all of a sudden it tips over the edge. And I understand why, it's a bit like speed limits. We introduce these sort of limits there, but there's something interesting around the way that human beings react and sort of look at rules. And to your point, if you've got somebody who is spending their whole life walking that line, then actually I always think that demonstrates they will go, I'm compliant because all of my gifts are $50. Right? I never go over the limit. All my right? I never take anything I shouldn't. I'm just within. But if you're literally constantly on that line, that is not an ethical decision that you're making, or indeed a realistic one, because the rules aren't realistic. That is you going, I'm gaming this system. And so I think there's a really good example of, people coming in just under the limit each time on everything, right? I think is a fascinating example. It's not actually the thing that you might, the headline think, he's always or she's always compliant. Actually, it's not. They're not. They might be in numbers terms from a codified perspective, but that's where you want to start looking, because that's letter of the law, not spirit of the law stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So my dad had a real estate sign business, and there was a local law enforcement, cop who really helped him out because someone kept stealing his signs, and so. My dad, yeah, I know.
It's amazing what people steal, right? But
yeah, they kept stealing the signs. So this cop, my dad being, I get my creepiness from my dad. He found out who it was because he literally set up surveillance on his signs, and he found out, and the cop went and talked to the guy and said, you can't steal the signs. The guy's following the rules. It's on public property. He's done it. My dad was incredibly thankful for this cop. And it was at the agency that I worked for previously. And so my dad calls the cop, and he's like, my dad loved to give presents, like, Costco gift baskets. And he's like, I'd like to drop off a gift basket for you. And she's like, oh my God, no, you can't do that. And my dad's like, why? You really helped me out. And she's like, yeah, we can't do that. So my dad's like, well, I want to talk to your supervisor. So he ends up talking to the supervisor, who was my boss at one point. And my ex-boss reaches out and he's like, your dad is the nicest guy, but he just doesn't get this whole non-gift stuff. It was so funny. So my dad ended up being able to buy a bigger basket, but it had to go into the squad room. Like, she couldn't personally have it at her house. So my dad ends up he kind of grumbled, I ended up having to buy a much bigger basket because I had to give it to the whole squad room. But he didn't get it. And he's just like, she's not going to not give me a ticket if I'm speeding down the street in my car with my signs just because I, gave her kudos. And I'm like, you never know what it is that tips someone over the line, Dad. So I was like, honestly, Dad, just forget it. No, I got to give a gift basket. It was really pretty funny. And my old boss, he's like, your dad's awesome, but God, he's just determined to give her a gift basket. I'm like, yeah, he's old school, man.
But here's the interesting bit, though, right? But it could backfire badly. He's given me gifts. I don't want to look like I'm corrupt, so I'm going to have to get him. Right? So actually, I would argue you need to apply counterintuitive logic there. Think carefully about what position you're putting them in. I mean, this whole thing is really interesting, right? Because it is not about reality, it's about perception. All of this stuff that you're talking about is perception. So I perceive that I'm not at risk from this sort of crime. Right? That's just my view of the world. Equally, I perceive, if I'm the one committing the crime, that, well, it's not really theft, is it? Because of insert justification here. And I think this is the fascinating bit, is it's a really good manifestation of how reality is if reality for all of us is our perception and how we see the world and how we view it. And the human inability to see the world for what it is. And there's very good reasons why we have that. So I don't want to criticize the way our brains operate, but that's the cause of this problem, right? It's a perception gap between it. So if business owners actually realized the risks they were running, they might behave differently. And if the people that were committing these crimes realized actually what they were doing, if they had the stark truth of what they were up to presented to them, then you get a different behavior there. And so all of this stuff comes down to perception.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it's not rocket science. Embezzlement is it's kind of low hanging fruit. I mean, I joke I'm not a CPA because I can't pass the CPA exam. Have I done financial statement fraud and conflict of interest cases? Yeah, absolutely. But embezzlement is just, money in, money out. And that's the other thing is, so there's I don't know if you've seen it. It's on HBO. It's called Bad Education with Hugh Jackman. And it's about it was the largest school embezzlement ever in the United States. And the guy it was a superintendent and also like his business office manager. And she actually ended up stealing more than him, which was, unusual because women generally only steal 45 to 50 cents on the dollar. But she actually outstole him. She's passed. But the guy went to prison and he's now collecting a $170,000 pension from the state of New York. But I listened to him on a podcast because when the movie came out, someone wanted to hear his perception of the movie. And he said, it all started with 2 Greek salads and 2 Cokes. And he went out over the weekend, I assume. He bought 2 Greek salads and 2 Cokes, and he put it on probably the school district's expense or, credit card. And he goes, and Monday came and nothing happened. Do I think a guy like that grew up saying, I'm going to rip off the school district a couple $1 million? No, but he got away with it. And it was so easy that it was so easy. And again, you get someone who steals $750,000. Is it one check? No. It starts small and then it hockey sticks. So, yeah.
So does that put you in the camp with the broken windows policing camp, i.e. that you have to eliminate small errors and go after the small stuff because small stuff can become big?
I am so conflicted on the broken windows thing because a long time ago I was really into it. And I actually think the broken windows theory, I mean, it's been disproven just because of, racial profiling and all sorts of things. But I do think in embezzlement, when you have someone who steals a small amount or breaks a policy, I want to say you got to cut him loose. And I have an example, and I don't think I gave it on the other episode I was with you. I have a friend, her brother and her sister owned a business. And my friend was growing up, she didn't play with dolls. She played Office with adding machines. She was all over it. So the office manager comes back from Costco one day and gives the receipt. And my friend sees that she's put on 2 pairs of Costco Kirkland jeans, $25. It's a $900 bill, $25. And my friend goes running to her brother, who's the CEO of the company. And she's like, we got to fire Faye. And he looked at my friend and he's like, are you nuts? I would have to train someone new. I'll take it out of her paycheck. No big deal. You are just, you're just a rule follower. Well, the business gets sold. The brother buys out the sisters. And all of a sudden one day I'm reading the local newspaper and I see that this company has been ripped off to the tune of $500,000 by Faye. So I immediately call up my friend, I'll call her the tattletale sister. And I'm like, what the heck? And she's like, so she tells me the whole story. And I'm just like, oh my God. And the funny thing, it's not funny, but she says, we didn't have $500,000. And I'm like, yeah, you did. And she goes, no, we didn't. When my brother bought us out, we had a business valuation and there wasn't that money there. I just like, yeah, there was. And she's like, no, we didn't have it because the business valuation. I'm like, so I stop and I go, you realize your brother had 2 sets of books and the valuation was on the fake set of books. And she's like, there was a huge pregnant pause. And she goes, what? And I said, you got ripped. So not only did like the business get ripped, but you got ripped because your valuation was less than what it should have been. And as I said, I don't think Thanksgiving dinner that year was quite as comfortable as it is.
There was no giving of thanks going on, that's for sure.
Because you had her saying, I told you so. And then him saying, well, I got it in the end, because it just was like, it was just too much. It was, and I will say, and, I'm not saying names here and my friend wouldn't listen to your podcast, but her brother was ethically challenged. So for him, he's like, oh yeah, $25, who cares? But then he turns around and he basically, I'm going to say cheats his sister out of some of the money on the valuation because, he wanted more money for himself. So did the office manager sense his lack of ethics and just feel that she could steal? I don't know, maybe. It's hard to say. So again, it goes to tone at the top. Like, just try not to give your employees any justification in their head.
And it's interesting when you tell that story, because there's a point here, which is that none of us are pure. And so that there is something interesting, and I've been really, as you were telling the story, I was sort of mulling over, thinking about things that I've done and I've observed in other people. Is find me someone who says they've never done, never lied or never done whatever, and I'll point you a liar, right? And so it is fascinating at the moment because we need to have these standards and rules, but we're also all flawed. So I'm really fascinated when I explore this idea of zero tolerance for things, is to sort of go, people will screw up, will make mistakes, and will get things wrong. And if we pretend that that's not happening, we cause ourselves bigger problems because people hide these things. So we need a space, to use a sort of Catholic Church analogy, we need a place for repentant sinners to be able to absolve themselves of their sins. And we don't want a situation where if you come forward, the result of commit even a small mistake and you'll be fired. We know what happens then. People don't come forward. So zero tolerance for every single kind of mistake. Equally, you don't want to have a thing where you go, oh, well, it's only a series of small things and, it's willful stupidity or negligence. And I think this is a really fascinating balancing point, because it's not like, to your sort of whole narrative, it is not like a sort of, there's a bunch of people there who are the baddies, right? The stuff that we get in the movies, right? Under those James Bond villain, right? Who don't have an ounce of, that's not the way the world operates. The way we're taught as kids, right? So we can delineate between good and bad and understand, but that's not the way the real world operates. So there's this huge gray area. And it's not like you're looking in from a position of 100% cleanliness and piety onto these awful people. We bring our own pieces to the mix. So it's a little bit harder than something where, if you were just trying to program computers and the algorithm was slightly flawed and you just keep reprogramming. You can do that as a computer program. You can go, it's not doing what I want it to do. As a human being, when you're observing, and particularly when you're having these influences that you're talking about, we don't come at it from a position of purity.
Well, so this is really interesting, and this goes to like the broken windows and everything. Dan Ariely, I keep bringing him up because he's like the rock star, but he did a webinar, and he was talking. He did this study, and I can't remember how many things he looked at, but it was a large amount. Was to find companies to invest in, and one of the most telling things was the companies that you could admit a mistake. Those companies are the companies that did well. So again, this goes to zero tolerance. If you feel that you can't admit a mistake, then you just hide it. So one of his best sort of predictors of success for publicly traded companies was he had done the survey, and it was you can come forward and say you screwed up. So that's really, really hard. I mean, I had a boss and he accidentally charged on his company credit card at like Costco or, whatever. And he came in, granted he was a boss, he came in and immediately said, I messed up. But what if a lower level employee comes in and says, I messed up? Are they going to think that they're going to get fired? And so they're just like, forget it, I'm not going to say. I mean, and I wish I had that sort of study at my fingertips with Ariely, because when I heard him do this, it was like, the bells just went off. You have to be able to admit your mistakes, and you have to have an environment that allows it. So if, like what I just earlier said, I'm totally contradicting myself, is cut them off right then and there. I think you can tell if someone really honestly does make a mistake. I don't know. I thought it was amazing what he said.
I love the fact that you just went, I've just contradicted myself, because I sit there and go, this is the whole point. There's a lot of complexity here. And so one of the things I think is really interesting is it brings us back to that point that you made around people going, that could never happen to me because brigade. And the reason that that's a really bad attitude to have is that you cannot control human behavior to the extent where you can eliminate all of this stuff. What you're doing is mitigating and so it's one of my simple rules of human risk, right? Is you cannot eliminate it. You can mitigate it, but you can't get rid of it. People are going to screw stuff up. And if you've got a world where no one is screwing up, let's call it North Korea, right? No one ever makes any mistakes, right? Then all you've got is a world of cover-ups. Because we will, even in a tightly controlled set of circumstances, we will make mistakes at some point. The key bit is to eliminate the mistakes you don't want, and to focus on the ones where, maybe it's okay to have an error, or you can contain it before it gets big. And I think this is a really interesting piece. So your point around the contradiction, I think, is inherent in this problem, which is the moment you just think this is a simple game to play and that's all there is to it, you're in trouble. The moment you start to recognize a bit of nuance. But I think to your point, that doesn't mean that there aren't some simple things that you could be doing that you can identify in the way that'll help you put yourself in a stronger position.
Yeah. I mean, you've dealt with this more, but when you get a trader who, makes a bad trade and then it just covers up and it's good money after bad. I'm thinking of, what is it, Jerome Kercheval or whatever?
Jerome Kercheval, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think he, purposely is a bad person, or do you think he just covered up and it just went really badly?
My experience of these things, and I've never done it, so I'm always going to caveat that with I'm looking in from the outside, and of course you're never in their position. But it always seems to me that actually what is happening here is it's the same. What I find fascinating talking to you, it's the same dynamics. Right? Nobody goes out there and goes, I'm going to put on a massive rogue trade of like 2 billion in one go, right? It's small stuff. It's back to my Velociraptor testing of the defenses, trying these things out, seeing what happens. And then you get carried out and you normalize the small numbers, and then the bigger ones become easier, and so on and so forth. But I don't think, even the narrative of, he did it to inflate his bonus, I think in most cases is nonsense. I think what they're doing is, sure, they want to get well paid. They are trying to preserve their position. And because you don't give them a route to go, I screwed up, because it's this, particularly on trading floors with this macho thing, we celebrate huge successes. We don't talk about those things, and it makes you an idiot, loser, all those sort of negative connotations. I can't talk about that because I'm going to get fired. And that is broken windows policing in many cases. You're an idiot. And so I'll just trade my way out of trouble because I'm really good at this stuff, right? So what's the difference between me starting at 0 or starting at minus 500? Right, same thing. It's just an upward get. It's the same game I'd play in both positions. And so I think this is people trying to trade their way out of trouble. And of course, sometimes it works. And I think you sometimes get these big incidents because they have previously managed to get themselves out of trouble. It's a little bit like teenagers driving cars, right? They think they've got away with something, so they conclude that there's a skill that they have. And then they push it a little bit further. I think it's the same sort of dynamic. So I think this idea of kind of setting out to commit fraud, I always said it's a back to the discussion we had. It's sort of watch the ones who totally comply. Anybody that always gets their mandatory training on time, right? That always does, that is 100% compliant in every single aspect. Those are the ones to watch, right? Because they're probably up to no good somewhere. Because the only sort of people that would absolutely 100% tick the box are people that are up to no good and they don't want to get caught, right? So they totally would not. So there was a little bit of me that went, that's the place I would start looking, because if you really were up to no good from a motivated, perspective of doing the wrong thing, then that's how you're going to cover that particular piece up. So no, to answer a long-winded way of answering your question, but no, I don't think that at all.
Yeah. So we're all human. We all can screw up.
Time is catching up with us again, as ever, Kelly, with you. We've explored a whole host of things, none of which we were expecting to talk about. But I do want to come back. Remind people what the book is called and where they can find it.
So it is Embezzlement: How to Detect, Prevent, and Investigate Pink-Collar Crime. And it's on Amazon. It's on my website, pinkcollarcrime.com. And we said this earlier. Okay, my daughter says it's a pamphlet. I don't say it's a pamphlet. I mean, it's 100 pages, but our brain engagement is so light these days that it's really readable. Like, everyone who's reached out to me is like, this was just a quick afternoon read and full of information. It's footnoted and, lots and lots of resources. So
for everybody who thinks this isn't going to happen to them and the people that need to read this, right?
Yes. And it's just fun. It's like people will sit there and go, my editor, he's like, I can't believe this stuff. And I'm like, believe it.
There we go. That is the best sales pitch. Kelly, thank you so much. And I will reiterate the point around following you on social media, because it's rammed full of WTF moments. Great fun. It's hugely informative. And as ever, you've been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christian.
So that's it for another episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Kelly for appearing and to you for listening. To find out more about Pink Collar Crime, Kelly's book and her podcast, have a look in the show notes. There are links to all of those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the podcasting platforms. If you like the show and haven't yet left a 5-star rating on whichever platform you're using, please do so. It really does help. To find out more about Human Risk, go to human-risk.com, where you'll find links to the Human Risk video channel, newsletter, and other resources. I'll be back very soon with another episode of this podcast, but in the meantime, stay safe and thanks for listening.